The red door is inside your mind, the philosophy of Insidious. Part 1. The architecture of the inner abyss. The most terrifying red door in cinema does not hold demons or vengeful spirits. It holds you. In Insidious, Out of the further is not a distant physical dimension. It is the projected map of your darkest memories, the unresolved trauma and the guilt you tried to bury just to survive. Imagine lighting a candle in the center of a pitch-black room. The flickering flame illuminates a radius of just 2 or 3 feet around you. Within that tiny bubble of light, you can see the furniture, the walls, the floor, and your own reflection in the mirror. You feel safe, in control, and master of your immediate environment. Yet beyond the reach of that flame, the darkness of the room extends into the infinite. You cannot see what is hidden in those shadows, but you can feel a cold, silent, watchful presence waiting for the wax to burn out so it can take its next step. That flickering flame is your consciousness. The illuminated radius is your ego, the small fragment of your mind that you believe you dominate and call. The unfathomable darkness surrounding the light is your unconscious. In this terrifying chapter of Sony Pictures' horror franchise, Insidious, Out of the further, contemporary cinema abandons superficial jump scares and haunted house cliches to push us directly into this mental darkness. The narrative expands the mythology of the astral plane known as the further, revealing a devastating philosophical and psychological truth. The further is not merely a supernatural purgatory populated by wandering souls. The further is the physical, architectural, and somatic projection of the human unconscious. It is a timeless dimension built brick by our repressed fears, unconfessable guilt, childhood traumas, and our absolute refusal to face the finitude of life. If you have always viewed the Insidious franchise merely as a collection of well-calibrated jump scares, eerie lighting, and grotesque makeup, you missed the true framework that sustains this masterpiece of psychiatric horror. Insidious is not about monsters coming from a theological hell to attack us. It is about the monsters we create, feed, and lock in the basement of our own psyche, just to endure the weight of social existence. In this dense and expansive audiovisual essay, we will meticulously deconstruct the anatomy of the further. We will cross the portal of the mind through Sigmund Freud's revolutionary and unsettling psychoanalysis of the uncanny, das Unheimliche, Carl Jung's analytical psychology on the inevitable confrontation with the shadow, Arthur Schopenhauer's visceral pessimism regarding the will and the pain of existence, and the existential dread of Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. Pay close attention to every detail, every concept, and every narrative loop in this analysis. By the end of this breakdown, the red door separating the world of the living from the world of the dead will cease to be a mere fictional artifact. You will understand that the red door exists inside your own head, and that you voluntarily cross it every night when your conscious mind falls asleep and your unconscious takes control of your destiny. Part 2. Freud and the Anatomy of the Uncanny, to comprehend the suffocating atmosphere of the further in Insidious. Out of the further, we must turn to one of Sigmund Freud's most fascinating and unsettling works. Published in 1919, his landmark essay Das Unheimliche, translated into English as The Uncanny. Freud conducted a deep linguistic and psychological investigation to understand why certain experiences, images, or places cause a visceral horror that makes our blood run cold. Analyzing the evolution of the German word Heimlich, which originally signified that which is familiar, domestic, cozy, and intimate, Freud discovered a fascinating contradiction. Over time, Heimlich developed a second, opposite meaning, that which is concealed, kept secret, hidden from the eyes of others. Its linguistic opposite, unheimlich, the uncanny, is therefore not something totally new, unknown, or alien. On the contrary, Freud proved that pure, paralyzing horror does not stem from the completely alien. It arises when something that was once deeply familiar, intimate, and domestic has been repressed, buried in the unconscious by our defensive mind, and suddenly returns to the surface in a distorted, out-of-context form. The uncanny is the terrifying revelation of that which ought to have remained hidden, but has found a breach through which to escape. Think back to your own childhood for a moment. That dark closet in your hallway, the creaking staircase at night, or the abandoned attic in your family home. It is precisely that deeply familiar yet terrifying setting that forms the landscape of the further. This is the fundamental law governing the aesthetics and physics of the further in Insidious. Notice how the set design operates when mediums and astral travelers cross the threshold. The further never looks like a distant alien planet, an infernal cavern full of sulfur lakes, or a futuristic landscape. It looks like your childhood. It looks like the living room of your old house, the school hallway where you suffered bullying, the dark bedroom where you cried alone as a teenager, or an abandoned kitchen with peeling wallpaper. The further is the tactile manifestation of the uncanny. Everything there is vaguely familiar, yet immersed in a cold, dark, timeless fog. Objects are out of place, lights flicker at a sickly frequency, and the silence is heavy as lead. The entities inhabiting this dimension, from the lipstick-faced demon to the bride in black, are not extraterrestrial beings. They are the physical embodiment of repression. In Freudian psychoanalytic theory, repression, Verdrängung, is the automatic defense mechanism by which the ego pushes intolerable thoughts, shameful desires, aggressive impulses, and overwhelming traumas out of conscious awareness. The ego does this to guarantee our psychological survival. If we recalled every pain or every fear with absolute clarity every second of the day, we would lose our minds. However, Freud issued a terrifying warning. The unconscious is not a graveyard of dead memories. The unconscious is a boiling cauldron. Everything that is repressed remains alive, pulsing, and hungry for expression. The more energy you spend trying to forget a trauma, the stronger and more monstrous that memory becomes in the depths of your mind. In Insidious, out of the further, astral projection is the literal representation of a breach in the conscious dam. When an individual enters the further, they are not traveling through physical space. They are physically walking through their own repressed material. The spirits trying to grab the astral traveler in the shadows are repressed thoughts demanding a return to consciousness. The monster trying to possess the host's body does not merely want blood. It wants the conscious life that was denied to it when the individual tried to bury it in forgetfulness. Part 3. The Jungian Shadow and the Anatomy of Possession. While Sigmund Freud provides the structural blueprint for how the unconscious stores trauma, it is in the analytical psychology of his former collaborator, Carl Gustav Jung, that we find the key to deciphering the tragedy of demonic possession in Insidious. Jung expanded the concept of the unconscious beyond the personal realm, proposing the existence of a collective unconscious, an ocean of universal archetypes, symbols, and patterns shared by all humanity throughout the ages. Within this psychic architecture, Jung identified a fundamental structure called the shadow. The shadow is the hidden, unknown side of our personality. It is the vessel for all our character traits, impulses, traumas, desires, and weaknesses that our education, religion, and culture taught us to reject. The shadow is everything we do not want to be but inevitably are. It is our dark side. Jung left a solemn warning for humanity. The shadow cannot be destroyed or ignored. The more an individual attempts to present themselves to the world as a pure, perfect, rational, and flawless being, the denser and more autonomous their shadow becomes. If you deny the existence of your own dark side, the shadow begins to project outward onto the external world. You begin to see evil, threats, and corruption exclusively in others, unable to realize that you are merely staring at the reflection of your own mental basement. In Insidious, Out of the Further, the dynamic of demonic possession functions as a terrifyingly perfect metaphor for the collapse of the ego before the Jungian shadow. Look closely at how the narrative builds the profiles of characters who become prime targets for the entities of the further. They are never attacked at random. The spirits and demons of the further infiltrate through emotional cracks caused by denial. The Lambert family and the new protagonists in Out of the Further share the same tragic flaw, an obsessive attempt to pretend the past never happened, sweeping grief under the rug and repressing pain behind a facade of suburban normalcy. When an individual refuses to consciously face and integrate their shadow, their psychic shell weakens. The demon of the further is nothing more than an autonomous psychological complex that has gained enough critical mass to break through the barrier of the ego. Possession is not an act of external black magic. It is an internal revolution. It is the terrifying moment when the shadow takes the steering wheel of the psyche, gags the conscious ego, and turns the individual into a helpless passenger inside their own body. This is why physical weapons, Technology or brute force are completely useless in the further. You cannot shoot a psychological complex. You cannot stab your own guilt. The only way to banish a demon in the insidious universe is the process Jung called individuation, the painful, courageous act of looking at the grotesque, demonic figure in the dark, recognizing its traits, and saying, "You are a part of me." But if psychology explains how our mind shapes these monsters, there is an even older, more devastating force that dictates the laws of the further itself. To understand it, we must turn to the most pessimistic philosopher in human history. Part 4. Schopenhauer and the Metaphysics of the Insatiable Will. To elevate this analysis to an even deeper philosophical plane, we must step beyond psychology and dive into the pessimistic metaphysics of the great 19th century German philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer. In his monumental work, The World as Will and Representation, Schopenhauer built upon Immanuel Kant's philosophy to propose a dark, revolutionary view of reality. Kant had asserted that human beings can never perceive the world as it truly is in itself, the noumenon. We can only experience the world as it appears to our senses and mind, the phenomenon. Schopenhauer agreed with this division, but took a radical step further. He declared that the material world we see around us, trees, cities, our bodies, the stars, is merely a fragile illusion, a superficial shell he termed representation, or the veil of Maya. Behind this surface layer of physical reality lies a primordial, blind, irrational, insatiable, and eternal force that he named the will, der Wille. Schopenhauer's will is not a benevolent God, a divine intelligence, or a conscious cosmological plan. The will is a ravenous, directionless impulse of pure existence and consumption. It manifests in the gravity-pulling celestial bodies, in the plant bursting through concrete for light, in the predator devouring prey, and in the unceasing desires of living beings. Because the desires of the will are infinite, but the resources of the physical world are limited, existence is intrinsically marked by conflict, pain, and suffering. For Schopenhauer, life is a cruel pendulum swinging endlessly between the pain of deprivation and the boredom of satisfaction. The further in Insidious. Out of the further is the most cinematic realization of Schopenhauer's will ever brought to the screen. The further is the world stripped of the veil of Maya. It is a dimension where the illusions of time, space progress, and material comfort have been obliterated. What remains in the further is the will in its raw, hungry state. The souls trapped in the dark mist of the further are not in a theological hell being punished for moral sins. They are trapped in a state of infinite desire and suffering. When you watch the lipstick face demon obsessively stalking Dalton, you aren't looking at pure cartoonish evil. You are witnessing Schopenhauer's will in its hungriest, most parasitic form, an existential parasite starving for physical expression. Look at the behavior of the spirits inhabiting the further. They are eternally frozen in the moment of their greatest trauma, their unfulfilled desire, or their worst act of violence. They cannot evolve, they cannot rest, and they cannot forget. They are the embodiment of blind will, creatures desperately trying to grab a lantern, touch a living body, or invade a host's mind, because they are starving for the illusion of material. Life. Schopenhauer taught that the tragedy of the human condition stems from our blind attachment to the principium. Individuation is the principle of individuation. We deceive ourselves into believing we are isolated, autonomous egos independent of the rest of the cosmos. When death approaches, terror consumes us because we fear losing that individuality. The horror of Insidious arises precisely from this refusal to accept finitude. In trying desperately to cling to individual life after the death of the brain, the soul refuses to dissolve, transforming into a monstrous aberration in the further.
Part 5. Kierkegaard and the Dread of Mortality. While Schopenhauer reveals the metaphysical pain of the insatiable will, the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, the father of Christian existentialism, helps us comprehend the psychological dread experienced by the living as they navigate the boundaries of the further. In his classic works The Concept of Anxiety and the Sickness unto Death, Kierkegaard explored the profound existential vertigo that strikes human beings when they discover they are endowed with freedom, yet confronted by the abyss of the infinite and their own mortality. Kierkegaard defined anxiety or dread not as a common, fear of a specific object like fear of a wild animal or a storm, but as the dread of nothingness, the vertigo of freedom when staring into the abyss of one's own possibilities. Dread arises when an individual realizes they are responsible for their own existence and that, sooner or later, they must face the absolute silence of death. In Insidious Out of the Further, astral travelers and mediums, such as Elise Rainier and the investigators in this narrative, operate as classic Kierkegaardian figures. They carry the weight of an expanded consciousness. While ordinary people live anesthetized by daily distractions, astral travelers are forced to look directly into the abyss of the further. Walking through the further holding a small lantern is the ultimate visual metaphor for Kierkegaardian dread. The lantern represents the fragile flame of human reason and individual faith, trying to pierce an ocean of darkness and chaos. Every step taken in the further is an existential choice where any hesitation, doubt, or surge of panic can cause the traveler to lose their way forever, leaving their physical body vacant for a hungry entity. Kierkegaard stated that the sickness unto death is despair, the state in which an individual fails to harmonize their finite dimension, their physical body history, and earthly life, with their infinite dimension, their soul, consciousness, and relationship to the eternal. And out of the further is the realm of absolute despair. The souls wandering there have lost the capacity for existential synthesis. They have become purely infinite, unanchored from reality, haunting the corners of memory. When an astral traveler enters this dimension, without a clear moral purpose or a deep emotional anchor in the living world, they are swallowed by vertigo, the dread of knowing that your physical body lies in a bed in the real world. Completely vulnerable and defenseless while your spirit wanders a hallway, populated by unconscious demons, is the ultimate expression of Kierkegaardian existential terror.
Part 6. The Red Door and the Pedagogy of Horror as Insidious. Out of the Further accelerates toward its climax. The narrative converges on the most iconic and philosophically dense symbol of the franchise, the Red Door. Within the production design and narrative structure of the series, the Red Door serves as the absolute threshold, the point of no return separating the conscious mind from the deep unconscious, the world of the living from the realm of the dead, the security of illusion from the painful truth of reality. Why is the door red? Red is the color of blood, fire, and danger, but it is also the color of passion, birth, and raw vital energy. The Red Door is the threshold of psychic rebirth. To cross the Red Door voluntarily means abandoning the comfort of everyday certainties and accepting a direct confrontation with the core of human trauma. In the climax of Out of the Further, the protagonist is forced to descend into the deepest levels of the further to reclaim a lost fragment of their own identity. They must navigate hallways that represent the moral failures and hidden secrets of multiple generations of their family. Here, the film delivers its most devastating psychoanalytic lesson. Most people spend their entire lives trying to padlock the Red Door, piling mental chains, barricades, and distractions against it to ensure that whatever is on the other side never escapes. They use pharmaceuticals, corporate routines, mindless consumption, and obsessive denial to keep the door shut. However, as Freud, Jung, and Schopenhauer taught us, the harder you fight to lock that door from the outside, the more the pressure builds within the unconscious. The frame begins to buckle, the hinges creak, and the monsters on the other side begin to whisper through the cracks. The film's climax proves that true salvation does not consist in locking the door forever, nor in trying to destroy what lies beyond it. True salvation consists in opening the door voluntarily, lighting the lantern of consciousness, stepping into the darkness, confronting the demon sitting in the center of the room, and understanding its history. When the protagonist finally confronts the entity that terrorized them throughout their life, they discover that the monster was not an ancient alien curse or a demon from theological hell. The monster was the embodiment of unspoken family shame, silenced abuse, and generational guilt. The moment they name the pain, accept the suffering as part of their story, and integrate that memory into their ego, the entity loses its metabolic power. The demon shrinks. The vivid red of the door fades, and the mists of the further begin to recede.
Part 7. The Mirror of Contemporary Society. We arrive at the crucial point where the psychological horror of Insidious, Out of the Further connects viscerally with our 21st century reality. Why does this story resonate so powerfully and induce such lasting dread in modern audiences? We live in an era of generalized emotional anesthesia. Contemporary society is a machine specifically engineered to prevent us from thinking about death, pain, aging, and the unconscious. We are bombarded daily by endless screens, intermittent notifications, quick hits of dopamine, anti-aging filters, and toxic positivity that tells us pain is merely an error in processing that can be deleted with the right app. We have turned our culture into a massive effort to sweep grief and finitude under the rug. We hide our sick in sterile facilities, make up our deceased so they appear merely asleep, and avoid at all costs any deep conversation about existential emptiness. We try to reduce life to a perfectly curated digital feed. In this landscape of collective numbness, the horror of Insidious acts as an electric shock to the psyche. The film reminds us that while you can hide trauma from your public profile, delete photos from your past, and take anti-anxiety medication to slow your heart rate, you can never deceive your unconscious. The further is where everything our society tries to anesthetize goes. Every unwept tear, every unprocessed grief, every repressed rage, and every fear of death you pretended not to feel accumulates in the mist of the further. And the more our society pretends the darkness does not exist, the closer the red door comes to bursting under the pressure of our collective repression. The terror of Insidious. Out of the Further is not passive entertainment about monsters jumping out to make us leap from our seats. It is a psychoanalytic and philosophical manifesto on the urgent necessity of confronting our complete humanity, with all its beauty, but also with all its pain, mortality, and inner darkness. The astral traveler's lantern is the perfect metaphor for human consciousness itself. In a world dominated by the illusion of control and the denial of suffering, genuine courage is not pretending you aren't afraid of the dark. Genuine courage is taking your small lantern, opening the door, stepping into the mist, and having the fortitude to speak with your own ghosts. Part 8, Conclusion and Existential Provocation, Insidious. Out of the Further leaves us with a final lesson that echoes long after the lights in the theater come up and the credits roll. The brightest and truest light of human consciousness is not the one that tries to illuminate the whole world to ignore the shadows, but the one that refuses to go out when we are forced to walk through our own inner darkness. The film teaches us that true hell is not a physical place where the wicked go after death. True hell is remaining trapped forever in the prison of a mind that refused to grow, refused to forgive, and spent a lifetime running from its own memories. The next time you are alone in your house in the silence of the night, and you hear a creak down the hallway, or feel a sudden chill that raises the hairs on your arms for no reason, do not look under the bed and do not search for ghosts at the window. Look within, take a deep breath and ask yourself with absolute honesty, what is the trauma, the guilt, or the pain of your past that you have been trying to hide in the dark, and that is finally knocking from the inside of your own red door? If this deep dive into the psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud, the analytical psychology of Carl Jung, and the pessimism of Arthur Schopenhauer brought a new dimension and respect for the philosophical architecture of Insidious. Out of the Further, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We deconstruct the darkest minds, cinematic masterpieces, and the ideas of history's deepest thinkers every single week, bringing academic video essays with the rigor and density that pop culture deserves. And now I want to open the debate with you. If you were forced to cross the red door today and walk through the mists of the further, what memory, trauma, or fear from your past would become the most dangerous demon stalking your consciousness in the dark? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read and reply to all of you. Thank you so much for watching this essay to the end. Keep your lantern lit, take care of your mind, and see you in the next video.